Hey guys, welcome to episode 9 of Mountain Murders.
Hey, what's up?
Hey, what's up?
I feel like we've been getting a lot of positive feedback from folks.
Yes, definitely.
I've noticed a couple of reviews have been left for us.
Yep.
With Mountain Murders, which is awesome.
It
Thanks
is.
for the feedback. So one of the comments that I had received from a friend, actually, she was like, mentioning that we had accents. And I'm like, well, yeah, we're from the mountains. Of course we do.
I don't know what she's talking about.
Well, we are from Western North Carolina, and that
Yeah.
is why we call the show Mountain Murders, because we are real mountain folks talking about real mountain murders that have happened locally. And we actually put a poll out on Facebook, was that last week, asking people what they'd like to hear. And we gave them some options, and they voted to hear some stories about murdered sheriffs.
Right.
And there's actually a couple here in Western North Carolina, surprisingly. 3 of them in Jackson County.
That's crazy.
I know. So it just didn't pay to be a sheriff in Jackson County in the, I guess, 20s, 30s, and 50s.
So, like we were discussing earlier, this is older cases, back when the sheriff was more hands-on.
Yeah, a couple
Less
of them
of an
are.
administrator, more of a going around taking care of the town kind of guy.
Yeah, a couple of them are, and we will maybe skip around a little bit to some different areas. We have, like I mentioned, 3 stories out of Jackson County, North Carolina. We have a story out of Haywood County, and then we're going to skip over to Rutherford County, which still would be considered, I guess, the foothills of Western North Carolina.
Oh, definitely.
And so we have a story from there that's a little more recent. But, fallen officers is, nothing new. I mean, we still have that happen occasionally around. And always,
Unfortunately.
always sad to hear about that. But these are some pretty interesting ones. So you ready to get started?
Yeah, but can we ask the audience what they think about what I asked you just a minute ago?
Sure. What are we talking about?
With me opening the show and saying, "Hey guys,"
Yeah.
I was just wondering if that anybody finds that offensive or if they just consider it a turn of phrase.
I don't know. In this politically correct age, you might just want to say, "Hey, y'all."
Yeah, I should. Okay, so should I say "Hey y'all" or "Hey guys"? I'm just gonna go with "Hey y'all."
I'm going to say, "Hey, y'all," because 1, it's such a great bit of local color, and 2, it's pretty inclusive.
It applies to all of y'all.
All of y'all, including your cats, your dogs.
Ewanses.
Yeah, everybody.
Okay, I'm gonna stick with that.
All of the above.
Okay, let's do this.
Are you ready? Okay, I'm ready. So this is pretty fascinating stuff. So September 1st, 1928, which would have been a Saturday, I guess word had spread pretty quickly around Jackson County that the following evening, or the previous evening, pardon me, at a box supper, which I guess was a thing they did back then, at the Balsam School, this escaped convict named Ed Smathers shot and killed the deputy sheriff, Claude Green.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So people said that Ed Smathers had 2 guns on his person, and I guess pulled out both guns, starts blazing. I tried to find some newspaper reports and clips. They were pretty vague. But one of the things I did find was that interest in this case was so great that the newspaper described it as the largest crowd to appear in court, like in Jackson County history. And they called in 100 men from Haywood County as potential jurors.
Ah.
Yeah, and Ed Smathers was convicted of second-degree murder, and he was sentenced to serve 20 to 25 years. But after only serving a short time, he was paroled and moved out west.
Did you say second degree?
Yep.
So, did you say an escaped convict?
Yeah.
How in the world did they get knocked down? I mean, I know about premeditation and first-degree murder and all that, but I don't know. That's very interesting.
Now, some of the things I did find in research was that Smathers' family said that he actually wasn't the gunman, that he was there, but he had a cousin who was actually responsible for shooting Claude Green, and that he was wrongly convicted. But yeah, second-degree murder, was sentenced to serve 20 to 25 years, but apparently only served a very short sentence, and then he got out and moved out west.
Yeah, it just leaves me wondering if he knew they were escaped, recognized them, and tried to approach them.
Yeah, well,
and all that.
again, through research from some of the newspaper articles dating, back to 1928, there really wasn't any reporting on the motive, the why. Why did he do this?
Just the
But-
fact of how it happened and the community's reaction, basically.
Yeah. But this was 1928. So fast forward about 10 years later in Jackson County, another sheriff is murdered. So Sheriff Mason and a deputy named Homer Turpin, they went to the home of Donald Ashton Webster on Wednesday, June 15th, 1938, to serve some commitment papers when Sheriff Mason was shot in the shoulder and chest by a shotgun blast. So Deputy Turpin immediately, fled the scene, went to town to try to get assistance. And while, he was coming back to make an arrest, with some backup, he ended up finding Mr. Ash dead in an upstairs bedroom from a self-inflicted gunshot wound.
Wow.
Yeah. So only a decade later from the first sheriff being murdered, the second sheriff is murdered in Jackson County.
Doesn't pay to be sheriff in Jackson County back then, does it?
Apparently not. And so then we're going to fast forward a few more years to 1953, the date being July 2nd, 1953, so just before Independence Day. Sheriff Middleton, along with several other law enforcement officers, went up to a neighborhood here in Jackson County called Canada. A lot of people call it Little Canada Community. It's a pretty rural area. It's up past Tuckasegee. I guess 281 is the road that'll take you out that way, almost into Transylvania County. Pretty far up there, really rural area, still fairly isolated, even in this day and age. So they go up there to try to locate this guy named Demos Woods, and he had assaulted a woman named Norvella McCall. And Woods had eluded arrest by hiding out in this heavily wooded area up in the Canada community, and several of Woods' friends who were with him in the woods were also arrested and gave information about Woods making, I guess, some threatening statements to the sheriff and about the sheriff. And so after they received some information about where in this very forested area, that Woods is hiding out, Sheriff Middleton, along with another officer named John Sides, were walking a trail in the woods when Sheriff Middleton was gunned down by a shotgun blast, struck him in the chest and neck. Officer Sides only saw two figures run into the thickly, dense wooded area, and then a manhunt ensued, and they had to get multiple law enforcement agencies involved, and Woods was eventually captured and convicted of murdering Sheriff Middleton. And Woods' incarceration information has been pretty hard to locate. I mean, if you go into, the Department of Corrections, it only goes back so far.
Right.
So I couldn't find a lot of information about this Demos Woods, how long he served in prison, but of course, local legend, folklore, stories passed down, if you will, say that he did serve a lengthy sentence for this crime and that eventually he was paroled and died of cancer.
Well, he sounds like a real asshole.
So this is one of the more interesting stories. I mean, not that, the others weren't that interesting, but I find this one particularly interesting because of the time period and I guess the history that kind of goes along with the story. So the death of Haywood County Sheriff, his name was John Philip Noland, and he was actually a Civil War sheriff.
Oh, wow.
So, during this time period, of course, America's at war, Civil War, the Confederacy had launched these conscription laws that basically required all able-bodied men to fight for the Confederate Army. And one reason why I think this is pretty interesting, and I'm not going to try to get into too many political discussions with people, but, you hear a lot about like the Confederate monuments, and people have a lot of harsh feelings about that war and about what the Confederacy stood for. And I get all of that. I really do. But there's always these questions about, why do Southerners have such an attachment to this history or this heritage, not hate kind of thing? And I really can kind of see both sides of it, because you have to figure a lot of these men who fought on the South Side really didn't have a dog in the fight. They were forced to sign up and fight on the side of the Confederate,
right.
The Confederates.
So they're basically
they're drafted.
They're drafted, forced, and they're not reaping the benefits of some of the spoils of the potential wins of that war if the South
Well, no,
won.
and especially here in Western North Carolina,
no.
there were so very few slave owners here in the mountains. I mean, most of the people in the Appalachian region were just poor dirt farmers trying to make $1 and feed their families.
Right, and that was typically the 1% to 2% richest people who might have benefited off that horrible setup.
Right.
But yeah, so they're forced to go. They do go.
Yeah.
And
then, years
in
later, their
remembrance,
families might want to honor them or their service.
Right.
And people don't really understand that. Well, why? That they fought on the wrong side of history
Right.
and whatever. But you have to realize that these people were drafted. It's not like they went and signed up or that they really wanted to do this.
Right.
And a lot of people were opposed to fighting and would take to hiding out. And so John Philip Noland, this sheriff in Haywood County, was charged with enforcing those conscription laws. So, his job was to find those deserters who were hiding in caves up in the mountains, in camps. And one of the interesting things is these draft dodgers, if you will, were supplied by their women.
Ah.
So they would go off and hide, and their wives and girlfriends and mothers and sisters were the ones smuggling food and things to them to help keep them alive because they were so opposed. They didn't want to go to this war. It wasn't their war.
Right, much like to be repeated in the Vietnam War when so many people left and went to Canada.
Right, exactly.
So
to go along with that, these two brothers, Bud and Harrison Robinson, they were hidden out in Rogers Cove, which is above what we know now as Lake Junaluska. And Bud got caught before the pair could flee. They were trying to get away from the war. And to get revenge on this sheriff who had arrested his brother, Harrison concocted this grand plan. And that he was going to get back at this sheriff. So I guess it was September 22nd, 1862. Joanne Robinson rode into Waynesville to visit her jailed husband. And before she got back to the place where Harrison was waiting, Sheriff Noland had hoped that he would be able to follow Joanne and find the criminals who had evaded him. This is all part of the master plan, though. Joanne, is part of this plan. She's riding off into the, wide blue yonder, hoping the sheriff's going to follow her into the woods, and he does. But it was a setup. So Harrison had sent Joanne to town knowing that the sheriff was going to tail her, that he just couldn't resist. And as Joanne approached, I guess with the sheriff on her trail, she gave some sort of signal to Harrison and maybe some of the other people who were hiding in the woods. And this heavy lead ball struck Sheriff Noland in the throat, killing him. And they now call that spot Noland's Gap. So he was killed just trying to find these war deserters.
Which he was likely reluctant, who knows, might have been reluctant to even fulfill that duty of his office, if you will.
Right. Well, the county arrested this guy named James Franklin as one of the people who caused Noland's death and sentenced him to death in a week devoted entirely to capital offenses in mid-October 1862, but I have no record of whether or not that sentence was carried out. Again, some of these criminal records from the past, spotty and hard to locate. So you really kind of have to just go on the oral histories and some of the stories that have been passed down.
Well, I'm going to guess that likely he was put to death because there wasn't any real appeals process back then, if you will. And they typically didn't play around with that kind of thing.
Well, several of those Robinsons, including Bud and Joanne, did flee, and they left and they went to the west. So abandoned their mountain home, went west, probably not ever heard from again. And some of the family members that are local here have changed their name to Robertson to distinguish themselves from those assassins.
Oh,
so right after this happened. I guess it was 1868, the Union Army dropped charges against the Unionist killers.
Wow.
So a pretty interesting bit of history. And there was a local attorney named Lynn Noland over in Haywood County who did a lot of research on this because this would have been his ancestor. And he did a lot of research on this situation. And, I guess a lot of his research and whatnot has been kind of published about this case.
Wow, that's very interesting.
So I got another one here that's a bit more recent, and this takes place in Rutherford County. This is kind of a crazy story. So May 31st, 1979, this fella named James W. Hutchins gunned down a Rutherford County, North Carolina deputy sheriff's captain named Roy Husky. And the brother of the Rutherford...
That's a hard one to say. It's